What if I told you that Poppy and the prototype aren't just significant on their own, but actually related? It might sound crazy, but if this is true, it wouldn't just clear up some of the game's biggest mysteries, it could completely change how we understand both of these characters. Their connection might hold the key to the prototype's real motives, Poppy's true purpose, and what's coming in Chapter 5. To get to the bottom of this, we need to start at the beginning by looking at what makes Poppy so different from everything else Playtime Co. ever created. Because right away, one thing is obvious, Poppy isn't just another experiment. She stands apart from all the rest, and there's one major reason why. She's the daughter of the company's founder, Elliot Ludwig.
I wish you were here, Dad. I could really use one of your talks right about now. You'd know what to say. When you were running this place, you always knew what to say.
By the time the Bigger Bodies initiative had started, Elliot Ludwig was already dead. We know this because Leith Pierre had taken over as Playtime Co.'s CEO by early 1990, as confirmed by his invitation letter to Harley Sawyer. Now, while there is a picture in Ludwig's office featuring the 1991 toy Mommy Longlegs, we can safely dismiss this as non-canon since it originated from a fan art contest. This means that Poppy must have been created long before the rest of the living toys, proving just how different she truly is. Unlike the Bigger Body experiments, which were designed by scientists who started out in the Young Geniuses program, Poppy was personally created by Ludwig himself. And clearly, his methods were very different. Poppy was able to survive sealed in her case for an entire decade without food or sustenance. Meanwhile, the Bigger Body toys require constant nourishment to stay alive. But there's even more to uncover. Thanks to some key evidence found in Chapter 2, we may actually be able to pinpoint when Poppy was created.
In the 1960s, an unfortunate family death had pushed Ludwig down to his lowest.
This loved one must have been Ludwig's daughter, especially considering how Poppy's maintenance video was clearly recorded around this same time period. This would even explain how Ludwig carried on with his work at the factory so casually, despite going through such a devastating loss, because he brought his daughter back to life by transforming her into the Poppy doll. Unless this family death wasn't a tragedy to Ludwig at all. In Chapter 2, there's a note found in Ludwig's office documenting Experiment 814. The fact that it's located here strongly suggests that he himself wrote it. Even more suspiciously, the note is placed right next to the VHS tape talking about the family death. The document details an experiment where a dead rat was used in a revival attempt, which ultimately failed, but what's even more disturbing is how the note ends. Ludwig concludes by stating that a larger test subject might yield different results. This heavily implies that Ludwig may have killed his own family member, probably his own daughter, all in the name of science. His supposed grief could have been nothing more than a carefully staged act for the press. If this theory holds true, then Ludwig may have been fully willing to not only potentially sacrifice his daughter's life, but also many others. The orientation notebook makes it abundantly clear that most, if not all, the Poppy dolls sold in the public in 1950 were living creatures, as if that wasn't already obvious from the start.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, Poppy?
I'm a real girl, just like you.
This meant that Ludwig already had experience in creating living toys before reviving his daughter in the form of one, ones that, just like her, didn't need to eat. After all, it's not like kids would have been physically feeding their Poppy Playtime dolls. So where does the prototype fit into all of this? Well, believe it or not, just like Poppy, he also wasn't an official Bigger Body experiment. A document about catnap found in the Chapter 3 ARG confirms that the prototype already existed by 1989, which was before the Bigger Bodies initiative was introduced. And that strikes us as strange, considering his name is literally prototype, suggesting he was the first of something, and he most certainly was, just not the first Bigger Body. That title belongs to Boxy-Boo. Instead, the prototype was the first experiment of an entirely different field, one that was briefly referenced in Chapter 4's ARG, though we still don't know much about it. But here's where things get really interesting. Despite being so different, the prototype and Poppy share a major similarity. Just like Poppy, he doesn't need food, a fact revealed in the Chapter 1 trailer. And no, this isn't because he's a robot. In fact, we know for certain that the prototype is biological since that same trailer explicitly states that he has a digestive tract. correct. And another major connection between the two? They both seem to care about the orphans. The prototype sacrificed his freedom to save orphan Theodore Graham Bell after his electrocution incident. He also made sure the other orphans weren't killed during the Hour of Joy, taking them to safety in the labs where he still resides. At least that's according to Poppy, and wouldn't you know it, her master plan just so happens to involve ensuring the orphans' safety before blowing up the factory, but it probably won't be that simple. Because if the orphans are under the prototype's care, then it seems like he doesn't want anyone getting near them.
That will give me labs access. At least with the two of us.
That is out of the question.
You listen.
Despite their similarities, Poppy and the prototype are still enemies. The prototype locked Poppy in a case for years solely for her disagreement with the Hour of Joy. While that event may have had some positive outcomes, it also came at the cost of countless innocent lives, and for that, Poppy wants nothing more than to see the prototype dead. But despite their opposition, the fact that these two characters are so special still feels significant. Now, one of the most popular theories suggests that the prototype is actually Elliot Ludwig himself. It makes some sense from a timeline perspective and would explain why he orchestrated the Hour of Joy, if, of course, his true goal was to put an end to the experimentation, but we already established that Ludwig wasn't truly against the experiments, at least not until the Young Geniuses program came into being, since Ludwig seemed to have learned from his mistakes by this time, but even then it's impossible to be sure. Hundreds of Poppy dolls contained human organs, and Ludwig was very much alive during that time, meaning he obviously approved of it. This is why I don't believe that Ludwig is the prototype, especially when you consider that Poppy herself would likely know the truth, and she never acknowledges the prototype as her father. Instead, I believe Ludwig created the prototype just like he did with Poppy, and suddenly, everything clicks into place. This is why neither of them need food to survive, and it would explain why the scientists struggled so much to perfect the bigger body procedures after Ludwig was gone. They were so desperate to figure it out that they even physically dissected Poppy, trying to reverse engineer whatever Ludwig had done to create her.
It's been weeks and weeks of taking things out and putting them back in and taking things out and putting them back in.
This could even give us more insight into why Sawyer held such a deep grudge against Ludwig. We already know that he felt heartbroken and betrayed after being removed from the Young Geniuses program, going so far as to label Ludwig a backstabber. But what if jealousy eventually started playing a role in this hatred as well? Maybe Sawyer wasn't just angry at Ludwig for betraying him. Maybe he resented the fact that Ludwig had already perfected the process of creating flawless living toys, while he had to spend so long studying just to figure it out himself. And in his obsession with uncovering the truth, Sawyer even resorted to torturing the prototype.
There's a secret inside you, 1006, valuable beyond all measure. I cut and prod and burn at it.
What if Poppy and the prototype's connection runs even deeper though? We know that Poppy is Ludwig's daughter, but what if the prototype is Ludwig's son? At first, this might sound far-fetched, but when we examine a few key pieces of evidence, it starts to make a lot more sense. However, before diving into those, it's worth debunking a popular theory, that the prototype is actually Rich, one of Playtime Co.'s employees. A Chapter 4 tape features a worker talking to Rich about a recent incident where his coworker mentioned him disappearing. We know that employees only started vanishing mysteriously after the Bigger Bodies initiative was well underway, thus after the prototype's creation. By that point, anyone who accidentally discovered the initiative without clearance would be eliminated, with Boxy Boo making a meal out of them. Rowan Stoll was the first example of this happening. Since Rich was still alive and well after these disappearances began, it's clear that he is not the prototype's true identity. So what's the evidence that Ludwig's son is behind said identity? For starters, Ludwig would have been an old man by the time the prototype was created, meaning his son would likely have been a fully grown adult. And the prototype's intelligence suggests that his test subject was a mature individual rather than a child. Now, if Poppy had any siblings in her human life, it's reasonable to assume that Ludwig, being a family man at heart as described in his biography, would want to reunite them by turning both of them into living experiments. Of course, this could explain some of the prototype's cryptic lines near Chapter 4's conclusion.
Always been about you and
What we are.
So, what does this all mean for the future of Poppy playtime? If the prototype and Poppy are truly brother and sister, then Chapter 5 could be where this is explicitly revealed, perhaps through a tense conversation between the two. However, what if the prototype, as the older brother, uses this to manipulate Poppy? He could twist her perception, convincing her that nothing he did was truly wrong, slowly pulling her to his side and turning her against the player. And let's be honest, Poppy hasn't exactly been the most trustworthy ally up until this point, so the idea of her betraying us, it seems more than possible. What do you think about all this? Let me know your theories in the comments. Also, if you're curious to see why Kissy is extremely misunderstood, click on this video here.